This is Jax The Hoplite, one of many new STLs from the new Legend of Keepers Kickstarter, and this is one of those lovely rare models where I saw him and immediately knew exactly what I wanted to do with him. And you'll be absolutely shocked to learn that it wasn't simply painting him like Leonidas from 300. Now before we get into things, this video is sponsored by Legend of Keepers. We'll be hearing more from them later. For now though, we need to get some colour on this here hoplite, and you'll be surprised to know that I went straight for dry brushing. But I did it for a very specific purpose this time round, because I didn't want to paint this hoplite as like a 300 inspired kind of bronze brassy armour kind of thing. Instead, I wanted to do a living statue. So I have a whole encounter planned out that I would need a living statue for, and I even have a nice kind of set piece in which this living statue can be placed, and I could not for the life of me find something that really ticked all the boxes for what I wanted, until I saw this. So having got a lovely high detail print from my Saturn II, I first base coated it in black because I always start with black, and then did some dry brushing with Two Thin Coats Dungeon Stone Grey. Now the question of course is, what do you do after you've dry brushed the first layer of grey? Well, you clearly get a slightly lighter grey and do the same thing all over again, which is exactly what I did. Again, Two Thin Coats Wizard Grey. I really like these paints for doing especially like stone effects. There's a really nice build up from the 3 shades of grey up to the white, and it works super well for getting a nice kind of carved stone effect. I also made more of a point to really smack it around the base as well, because parts of the base I want to be a lot lighter than other bits, just so it looks like it's more weathered in certain sections. One of the things I love about dry brushing stuff in fairly simple colour palettes like this is the fact that just 2 steps really brings out all of the detail on models. It already looks really kind of cool. Next I moved up to Carcharodon Grey from Two Thin Coats, again just going over all the different raised parts of the models, trying to bring out some areas more than other, not being particularly precise or precious about it. I kind of want there to be uneven patches, some sections where it's a lot lighter, some where it's a lot darker, just kind of making up for the lack of overall colour with a bit more contrast here and there, and also just really going for it in some places. I actually don't mind a bit of a chalky texture when I'm trying to do stone. I feel like having those kind of gritty sections makes it look a bit more stone-like. I don't know whether that's necessarily accurate, but it always looks better to my eye if it isn't all completely clear and clean. Normally if I'm dry brushing something like a cloak or armour, this is the point where I'm trying to be more controlled and trying to rein it in a little bit, and just trying to highlight all the best areas for that. But when it comes to doing this specific style, I feel like the third coat you can be just as clumsy as the first if you want to be. And again, at the end of it, you've got all these details picked out. It's starting to look a lot lighter, a lot brighter, but there's still a lot of shadow in there, which is pretty much exactly what you want. So far, layering up those greys has had exactly the effect that I wanted it to, but there is one more step before we start getting a bit more adventurous with this, which is to stick some white on there. Using White Star from Two Thin Coats, we do exactly the same thing that we did before, which is go all over the model, not being too careful with it, just making sure that we don't overwhelm all of the bits we've already touched. We want some bits to be really light, some of them to just have the slightest highlight on the edges. This is the stage where you kind of need to be a bit more careful, although admittedly I got kind of carried away. But it worked out in the end. That's the most important thing. Even if you feel like you've gone a bit heavy on certain stages, you can always go back and dull it down again, or you can just work with it and just bring the overall level of lightness up if you want to. It's really not the end of the world. After all, the most important thing is what it looks like at the end. It doesn't matter if you have to go back and fix things in the process. Now, if you wanted to deviate a little bit and do some slap chopping, this is the point at which to do that. You can just throw some contrast on top of all of this highlighting, and you'll end up with a really nice looking model. That's just not what I was going for here. Although having just said that, I'm planning to print more of these, so I might do one for slap chop research purposes. I think so far this is fulfilling the brief I set myself. It looks like a statue, it looks nice and stony, there's a bit of texture going on but not too much, it's still smooth in all the right places. So, before we put some colour on this lad, let's have a little chat about the Legend of Keepers Kickstarter. The Legend of Keepers Kickstarter has so much stuff on offer I barely even know where to start. Over 100 STL miniatures based on the heroes, monsters and traps from the 350-page campaign book. The STLs are sculpted by Squire Games and will be available in both supported and unsupported STL formats. Not only that, there's going to be over 200 STLs from Stonecraft Dungeon, which is Squire Games' new line of 3D printable terrain. When it comes to adventuring into those dungeons, players can choose the classic approach approach and control the heroes doing the marauding, or they can choose to play as the monsters defending their dungeons from heroes controlled by the DM, which I really like. And if you've decided to wake up and choose violence, there's a full-on PvP mode as well. There'll be a link in the description and in the pinned comment to the Kickstarter for Legend of Keepers, so make sure to go and check it out. Now, while this is a living statue, and while I did already have an idea for adding a bit of colour to it, I felt that the colours I'd picked weren't quite enough to make it visually interesting enough. It is a nice effect. I do like the fact that it is that kind of greystone textured look, but at the same time, something needed to kind of stand out. There needed to be some focal points, some bits that contrasted with kind of how monotone and grayscale the rest of it was, and I struggled for a little bit to think what that would be. I almost painted the cloak red, just because then it would look like there's some kind of cloth draped, but then I actually thought I preferred the cloak looking like it was carved out of stone, because that is some ridiculously good craftsmanship right there. Instead, I settled on using bronze. Not least because the other colour scheme that I thought of when I looked at this for the first time was bronze armour. So having like bronze metal inlaid into the statue, or at least bronze plating, I thought that was a nice contrast and kind of added a bit more just visual interest to it. I didn't want to go crazy with it, I just wanted a few points on this model to stand out, so I decided to go for the shield, decided to go for the crest on the head, and for the tip of the spear. Just add a little bit of extra colour and kind of draw the eye to those 3 spots on the model. I'm also a bit of a sucker for glowy eyes, so I had to give the helm and the shield glowy red eyes, because surely you can't beat that as a way to indicate that this thing is not only alive, but it also wants to kill you. Now that we've done all of that work building this up to look like a stone statue with some bronze elements, it's time to go mad. Absolutely mad, I tell you, with moss. This is dirty down moss, and I absolutely love this stuff. It's basically magic in a bottle. Same thing as the rust that they do. The rust effect that they have is insane. The moss is so nice, and one of the reasons I wanted to keep this model mostly grey, keep it like grey stone all the way across it, apart from that bit of kind of bronze highlight, is because I wanted to put moss not all over it, but just in select spots, just certain areas on the model, make it look as though it's slowly being overgrown, that there's like little bits of it where life is just kind of clinging on and starting to spread. Now, it didn't feel right to have stuff growing on parts of this stone statue without there being some sort of weathering or change to the bronze elements, so I used some of the Neolac Oxide from Citadel, because that seemed like a nice way to get another bit of colour on there without completely overwhelming what we'd already done, and also make it so that it looked like the metallic elements had aged as well as the stone aging too. For me personally, both of these things they're like best used sparingly. I don't like absolutely slathering them on, but if you use them in just the right spots and with the right kind of moderation, they just lift it really nicely. And just like that, we're done. We have our living statue ready to ambush the party and start slapping them around. I'm really happy with how this came out. I had a very clear idea as to what I wanted from this, and because this model just stood out so much as being the perfect thing for the encounter that I've got planned, I'm really happy that it worked out as well as it did. I do think that adding that extra colour has really made a massive difference. I think it would be a bit too dull and a bit too lifeless, just with like glowy eyes and some moss. I think actually adding the metallic stuff and then weathering that a bit with the oxide has made a massive difference to this thing. I'm super happy with how it's come out, and the thing is, it's not just going to be this. Because Legend of Keepers sent me the STL for this, I'm going to print a couple more of these. I'm going to paint them up super quick, just like this one, and then I'm going to break them. I'm going to break them, and then I'm going to stick them into the scenery that the fight is going to take place on. I think it's going to work super well in the context of the scenery that they're going to be fighting in. I'm just super happy all round. Thanks once again to Legend of Keepers for sponsoring this video. Do check the Kickstarter out in the link in the description and in the pinned comment. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.